Dr. Farsalinos, thanks for joining us. Some background for our viewers. You are a cardiologist and researcher from the Onassis Cardiac Surgery Center and the University of Patra in Greece. You've conducted numerous research studies into the safety and behavioral use of e-cigarettes. Dr. Farsalinos, what are some of the challenges researchers face when studying e-cigarettes?
The device itself with the electronics, a combination of chemistry, food science, electronics, thermodynamics, all these things. It's really very, very complicated. And unfortunately, most of the researchers in this field who have been used to researching tobacco cigarettes have a complete lack of understanding about not only about how the cigarette works, but how it is used by the consumers.
You mentioned chemistry. So much of the controversy comes down to the ingredients of ejuice. Do we know what's in there?
What's in there? It's basically, first of all, there is no chemical which was invented just to be used in e-cigarettes. Everything inside the e-cigarette, the e-liquids, basically, they are well-known chemicals. And they are chemicals coming from the food industry. Now, one of the arguments which is valid is that these products have been tested for ingestion, to eat them, not for inhalation. And I agree. Still, there is some evidence for a lot of the ingredients, basically for the main ingredients of what's going on when you inhale them. One of the issues is probably flavors. There may be some flavoring compounds which may not be good to inhale. But one, we don't have any other alternative. The best possible choice is to use food-approved flavors. And the second is that e-cigarettes without flavors are not e-cigarettes. No one is going to use them. No one's going to like them, not because they have a bad taste, but just because they are boring. And people are choosing e-cigarettes because they enjoy their use. I mean, that's how e-cigarettes should be approached. A behavioral aspect, an aspect of the daily activity of humans that people want to enjoy using.
Dr. Farsalinos, there's a stigma around the use of e-cigarettes, isn't there?
One of the issues is that is the ideologic opposition. The cigarette has two major problems: the term cigarette in the name and the visual aspect. However, these are the biggest advantages of e-cigarettes because they resemble so much smoking. For me, that's a big advantage. For the opponents, it's a very big disadvantage.
Does the misperceived connection to smoking play a role in the fear over, say, flavors, attracting kids to vaping, which then potentially becomes a gateway to smoking?
First of all, we know that it's not targeting kids for a simple reason. We've seen through surveys that it's the adult consumers who have a high demand for different flavors. The issue of attracting kids is valid, but this doesn't mean that we have to ban flavors for a simple reason. First, there is no evidence right now that there are kids using e-cigarettes. There is a lot of experimentation. There is not enough use. Second, we don't see any getaway to smoking in youth. The increase in e-cigarette use in the US was accompanied by historically the biggest decline in cigarette smoke use among youth ever seen in the US, for the first time below 10%. And even the percent difference from the last year was the biggest we've seen in more than 15 years. So who is saying that there's a getaway to smoking? That's ridiculous, and we don't have such evidence. Now, you think that kids are going to be attracted by cigarettes. Okay, ban the use of e-cigarettes to kids. What's the problem? Why don't you take this very simple measure?
Okay, Dr. Farsalinos, what about the concern over safety for those who don't vape, but are around those who do?
If you're talking about second-hand exposure, the studies that have been published so far show that there are no risk to bystanders. So although there are some, as I said, very minor quantities of toxins or harmful substances in the vapor, when this is dispersed over the whole room, the levels are non-measurable. You cannot measure them. So basically, they are almost zero.
But what about exposure to nicotine?
The amount of nicotine absorbed by a bystander who lives in the same house with a vapor was so low the quantity that it couldn't have any, not only harm, but not even a biological effect. You know, biological effect means, for example, for nicotine, a slight increase in heart rate, which is not harmful, it's just acting, doing something. So the exposure to a bystander is not having any biological effect. It's so low. It's like, for example, eating 300 grams of eggplants, because also eggplants and other plants in this family contain nicotine.
Dr. Farsalinos, we do hear concern from public health officials over nicotine because it's addictive.
Let's remind the public health community something. Public health is about preventing disease and death, not about judging personal behavior. So if someone wants to use nicotine, we can provide some advice, but it's not the responsibility or even the right of the public health community to judge someone based on his need or his decision to use nicotine. Nicotine has never killed a single smoker. Nicotine is not a reason for developing cardiovascular or cancer disease. Smoking is the worst available product to obtain nicotine, the worst in terms of harm.
And harm reduction, saving lives, is really what it all comes down to, doesn't it?
They are saving lives every day. In the European Union alone, we have 6.1 million smokers who have quit smoking with the use of e-cigarette. The quit rate is 47%, which is unprecedented for anything else. They are saving lives. We have seen people who have never imagined of quitting smoking. And they reached a point where they were thinking that they will never be able to quit smoking. And they did, even within one day or within a few days, with the use of e-cigarettes. So what are you going to tell them? That they are not effective? Yeah, they're going to laugh.